My father looked at my 12-year-old daughter like she was nothing more than furniture in his way. Not his granddaughter, not family, just an inconvenience standing between him and his perfectly orchestrated Thanksgiving dinner. The dining room chandelier cast shadows across his face as he raised his hand and pointed toward the kitchen, his gold wedding band catching the light. "You can eat in the kitchen," he said, his voice carrying that same tone he'd used for 40 years to dismiss anyone he deemed unworthy of his time. Adults only at this table. I watched my daughter's face crumble in slow motion. Meredith had spent an hour that morning styling her hair, picking out her best dress, practicing what she wanted to tell everyone about her science fair win. She'd even written down conversation topics on index cards, worried she might forget something important when talking to the adults. Now she stood there in her emerald green dress with the tiny gold buttons she'd been so proud of, looking at 9 place settings arranged around a table that could easily seat 12. 9 place settings, 10 people. The math was deliberate, calculated. This wasn't an oversight or a miscount. This was my father, Roland Hammond, former bank executive and current family patriarch, making a statement about who mattered and who didn't. Meredith's voice came out as barely a whisper, but in that silent dining room where even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath, everyone heard her perfectly. "But I'm family too, right?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. It should have been followed by immediate reassurance, by voices rushing to correct this horrible mistake. Someone should have laughed and said, "Of course you are, sweetheart, let's get you a chair." My mother should have bustled in with an extra place setting, apologizing for the confusion. My brother Dennis should have offered his seat, made a joke to lighten the moment. Uncle Leonard, Aunt Francine, Cousin Theodore, my sister-in-law Pauline. 9 adults standing around that mahogany table my father had imported from Italy, and not one of them said a single word. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like a betrayal. I could see my mother Vivian's hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, but her eyes stayed fixed on the china plates she'd spent all morning arranging. Dennis suddenly became fascinated with adjusting his tie. Pauline examined her manicure. Uncle Leonard cleared his throat but offered nothing more. Aunt Francine, who never met a silence she couldn't fill with gossip, stood mute. Even Theodore, who'd been boasting about his Harvard acceptance just minutes earlier, found nothing to say. They all just stood there, waiting for this uncomfortable moment to pass, waiting for Meredith to shuffle off to the kitchen where they'd set up a TV tray next to the microwave, waiting for dinner to proceed as planned. The important family discussions my father had mentioned, the adult conversations that apparently couldn't tolerate the presence of a 12-year-old girl who'd made honor roll 3 quarters in a row. I looked at my daughter's face and saw something break behind her eyes. Not just disappointment, but understanding. The sudden crushing realization that these people she'd drawn pictures for, who sent her birthday cards signed with love, who posted photos with her on social media, talking about their precious granddaughter and niece, would stand by and watch her be humiliated without saying a word. So I did what any parent would do when faced with choosing between family tradition and their child's dignity. I took my daughter's trembling hand in mine, feeling how cold her fingers had gotten, how small she still was despite trying so hard to be grown up enough for their table. "We're leaving," I said, my voice cutting through their comfortable silence. My father scoffed, that dismissive sound he'd perfected over decades of board meetings and business dinners. "Don't be dramatic, Alexandra. It's just one meal." But it wasn't just one meal. It was every time they'd talked over her when she tried to join conversations. Every family photo where she was asked to step aside so they could get one with just the adults. Every holiday where her achievements were brushed aside, while Dennis's most minor accomplishments were celebrated with champagne toasts. It was a pattern I'd been too blind to see, or maybe too cowardly to acknowledge, until that moment when my 12-year-old daughter had to ask if she was really family. I took one last look at that beautiful table with its crystal glasses and silver candlesticks, at the family I'd spent my whole life trying to please, and I made a decision that would change everything. But walking out was just the beginning. What I did over the next 4 weeks didn't just destroy their Christmas. It shattered their entire image of what the Hammond family was supposed to be, and rebuilt it into something they never saw coming. The drive to my parents' house in Connecticut always filled me with a mix of nostalgia and dread. 3 hours from our apartment in Philadelphia, through winding roads lined with oak trees that had watched me grow up, past the country club where Roland still played golf every Saturday, beyond the private school where Dennis and I had learned to be proper Hammond children. Meredith sat beside me in our aging Honda Civic, wearing the new dress she'd picked out specifically for Thanksgiving, emerald green with tiny gold buttons that she'd fallen in love with the moment she saw it at Target. "Mom, do you think Grandpa will let me sit next to him this year?" she asked, adjusting her carefully braided hair in the visor mirror for the third time since we'd left home. My chest tightened. Roland had always been difficult, a retired bank executive who believed children should be seen and not heard, who thought respect meant fear and tradition, meant control. But Meredith was 12 now, not a little kid anymore. She'd grown so much this year, especially after the divorce. When David left us for his 25-year-old assistant, Meredith had stepped up in ways no child should have to. She'd held me while I cried, made her own lunches when I was too overwhelmed to function, kept her grades perfect despite our world falling apart. "We'll see, sweetheart," I said, pulling into the circular driveway of their colonial home. The same one where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd sat on the front steps in my prom dress, where I'd announced my pregnancy with Meredith 13 years ago, to their obvious disappointment about the timing. The house looked perfect as always, my mother Vivian's touch evident in every manicured shrub and polished window. The lawn was cut in precise diagonal stripes, the way Roland insisted it should be. Through the dining room window, I could already see the elaborate table setting, the china that only came out for holidays, the crystal glasses that had belonged to my grandmother. My brother Dennis's BMW was parked out front, still sporting dealer plates, probably leased just last week to impress Roland. Uncle Leonard's Mercedes sat beside it, and I knew Aunt Francine would make at least 3 comments about our Honda before dinner was served. "Remember what we talked about?" I said to Meredith, trying to inject confidence into my voice that I didn't feel. "Best behavior, okay?" She nodded eagerly, pulling out the index cards from her pocket one more time. I practiced my conversation topics. I can talk about my science fair project where I won 2nd place, or the book I'm reading for English class, or how I'm helping coach the younger kids in soccer. My heart broke a little, watching her prepare talking points for a family dinner like she was preparing for a job interview. But that's what Hammond gatherings had become, performance evaluations disguised as holiday meals. Walking up those front steps, I noticed things I'd tried to ignore before. The family photos displayed in the entrance window were all of Dennis, his graduation, his wedding, his promotion celebrations. The one photo of Meredith was tucked behind a vase, barely visible. I'd sent them dozens of pictures over the years, school photos, birthday parties, her soccer championship. Apparently, none had made the cut for prominent display. Vivian opened the door before we could knock, her smile perfectly practiced, the same one she wore at charity luncheons and country club gatherings. "Alexandra, you made it," she said, as if my attendance had been in question. "And Meredith, don't you look nice?" But she didn't really look at Meredith. Her eyes skimmed over my daughter the way you'd glance at furniture, acknowledging its presence without real interest. She patted Meredith's head absently, already turning toward the living room where the sound of Roland holding court carried through the hallway. "Dennis was just telling us about his promotion to senior partner," Vivian said, leading us past the formal sitting room that no one was allowed to actually sit in, past Roland's study where children were never permitted, into the living room where everyone was gathered with their cocktails. The room fell into that particular rhythm of a Hammond family gathering. Roland in his leather chair like a king on his throne, Dennis standing by the fireplace in his 3-piece suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, Pauline draped on the arm of Dennis's chair like an accessory, her diamonds catching the light every time she moved her hands. Uncle Leonard was already on his 2nd scotch, Aunt Francine was examining the room for changes to gossip about later, and Theodore stood stiffly by the window, a younger version of Roland in training. This was the family I'd grown up in, the one I'd tried so hard to please, never quite measuring up to their standards. Now I was bringing my daughter into it, watching her straighten her dress and practice her smile, hoping this time would be different. The moment we walked into that living room, I sensed something was off. The conversation stopped abruptly, like we'd interrupted something important. Roland didn't even look up from his scotch when he spoke. "There's my successful daughter," he announced, though the sarcasm in his voice was barely concealed. Dennis was just telling us about his promotion to senior partner at Whitman and Associates, youngest in the firm's history. Dennis stood there in his three-piece suit, trying to look modest while Pauline clung to his arm like she'd won a prize. "It's really not that big a deal, Dad," he said, though his smile suggested otherwise. "Congratulations, Uncle Dennis," Meredith chimed in, her voice bright with genuine enthusiasm. "Mom got promoted too. She's now the regional manager for 3 stores instead of just 1. She said it means she can finally afford to get our car fixed and maybe even take a vacation next summer." The room went cold. Pauline's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "How nice for you, managing retail stores. Dennis's promotion comes with a partnership stake worth $500,000. "That's wonderful," I said, keeping my voice steady while placing a protective hand on Meredith's shoulder. She was already shrinking back, recognizing the dismissal. Theodore chose that moment to insert himself into the conversation. "Speaking of achievements, did everyone hear about my Harvard Business School acceptance? Full scholarship, of course. They said my application essay about carrying on the Hammond legacy of excellence was one of the best they'd ever read." "That essay was brilliant," Aunt Francine gushed, "especially the part about learning business ethics from your grandfather. Roland, you must be so proud." "Of course I am," Roland said, finally looking up, his gaze sliding over Meredith and me like we weren't there. "It's important to maintain standards. Not everyone can, but those who do carry the family forward." Meredith tried once more, her voice smaller now. "I wrote an essay, too, for my advanced English class. My teacher submitted it to a state competition, and I won 3rd place. It was about how my mom is my hero because she works so hard and never gives up even when things are really difficult." Silence. Dennis studied his wine glass. Uncle Leonard coughed and reached for more scotch. Vivian suddenly needed to check something in the kitchen. "That's nice, dear," Pauline finally said, her tone suggesting it was anything but nice. "Theodore, tell everyone about your internship at Goldman Sachs." As Theodore launched into his rehearsed speech about quarterly projections and portfolio management, I watched my daughter slowly deflate beside me. Her shoulders dropped, her carefully practiced smile faded, and she tucked her index cards back into her pocket, realizing she wouldn't need them. When Vivian called us to dinner 20 minutes later, I was actually relieved. At least at the table, there would be food to focus on, less opportunity for these casual cruelties. But as we walked into the dining room, I stopped short. The table was set for 9. We were 10 people. I counted again, thinking I must be wrong. Roland at the head, Vivian at the foot, Dennis and Pauline on one side, Leonard and Francine on the other, Theodore next to them. 1 empty chair beside my designated spot, 9 place settings with the good china, the crystal glasses, the silver that Vivian polished twice a year, everything perfect and deliberate. "Oh," my mother said, her voice too high, too rehearsed. I must have miscounted, how silly of me. But I knew my mother never miscounted anything. She planned every detail of these dinners weeks in advance. "Meredith, sweetheart, I've set up a lovely spot for you in the kitchen. You can watch the parade on the little TV while you eat. Won't that be fun?" "But Mom," I started, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "She's 12. She doesn't need a kid's table. There aren't even any other kids here." Roland's voice cut through the room like a blade. "The dining room is for adult conversation tonight. We have important family matters to discuss regarding the estate planning and some investments that don't concern children." He pointed toward the kitchen with the same finger he'd used to point out our failures my entire life. "You can eat in there. Adults only at this table." Meredith's voice came out as barely a whisper, but in that silent room where even the antique grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath, everyone heard her perfectly. "But I'm family too, right?" The question hung there, a challenge wrapped in a child's confusion. My daughter, who'd practiced conversation topics on index cards, who'd chosen her best dress, who'd braided her hair 3 times to get it perfect, was asking the only question that mattered. The silence that followed Meredith's question was deafening. I looked around the room, waiting for someone to speak up. These people who claimed to love us, who sent birthday cards with love scrawled at the bottom, who posted family photos on Facebook with hashtags about blessing and gratitude. Dennis studied his wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. Pauline adjusted her napkin with surgical precision. Uncle Leonard cleared his throat but offered nothing more. Aunt Francine, who could find words to fill any silence when it came to gossip, stood mute. Theodore examined the chandelier. Even my mother just stood there, hands clasped, studying the pattern in the Persian rug. Not one of them said a word. I felt Meredith's hand slip into mine, her fingers cold and trembling slightly. In that moment, looking at her trying so hard not to cry, trying to maintain her composure like the proper young lady she thought they wanted her to be, something inside me snapped, not in anger but in absolute clarity, like seeing a picture come into focus after years of looking at it blurred. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, squeezing her hand. "You are family. Real family doesn't exclude 12-year-old girls from the table. Real family doesn't make children feel like they're worth less than the furniture." I stood up, still holding her hand, feeling a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "We're leaving." "Don't be dramatic, Alexandra," Roland scoffed, using the same dismissive tone he'd used my entire life. "It's just one meal. You're going to upset your mother after all the work she's put into this dinner." "No, it's not just one meal," I said, looking directly at him for perhaps the first time in years without flinching. "It's every meal where she's been pushed aside, every gathering where you've ignored her achievements while celebrating Dennis getting a new car, every family photo where she's been asked to step back so you can get one with just the adults, every single time you've made her feel like she doesn't belong at her own family's table." Dennis finally found his voice, though he still wouldn't look at me. "Come on, Alex, don't ruin Thanksgiving over a seating arrangement. Dad didn't mean anything by it. You know how he is about formal dinners." "That's exactly the problem, Dennis. We all know how he is, and we all just accept it." "Well, I'm done accepting it." I turned to my mother, who was wringing her hands now, her perfect hostess facade cracking. "Mom, you spent 3 days cooking this meal. You called me twice to ask about Meredith's favorite dishes. You made sweet potato casserole specifically because she mentioned loving it last year. And now you're going to stand there and let her eat alone in the kitchen like hired help?" "Alexandra, please," Vivian whispered. "Let's not make a scene. We can discuss this later." "When, Mom? When she's 16? 18? When she's grown up? Believing she was never good enough for this family? There is no later. There's only right now when my 12-year-old daughter needs someone to stand up for her." Pauline decided to interject, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're overreacting, Alexandra. Children eat separately at formal dinners all the time. It's actually quite common in proper households." "Proper households?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean households where people care more about appearances than actual family? Where bloodline matters more than love? Where a child's worth is measured by their ability to be invisible?" Uncle Leonard shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Alexandra, your father has his way of doing things. Traditions are important." "Whose traditions, Uncle Leonard? The ones where your own children stopped coming to family gatherings 3 years ago? Where Cousin Janet only sends Christmas cards now instead of visiting? Those traditions." The room went even quieter, if that was possible. I'd crossed a line mentioning the family members who'd already distanced themselves, the ones whose absence was explained away with busy schedules and conflicting commitments, never acknowledging the real reason they stayed away. Roland's face was turning red now, the vein in his forehead that appeared when he was truly angry beginning to throb. "If you walk out that door, Alexandra, don't bother coming back for Christmas or any other family gathering. I won't have this kind of disrespect in my house." I looked down at Meredith, whose eyes were wide, tears finally spilling over. Then I looked back at my father, this man who'd controlled our family through fear and tradition for so long that we'd forgotten what actual love looked like. "That won't be a problem," I said, my voice steady and clear, "because after tonight you won't be invited to ours." I grabbed our coats from the hall closet, helping Meredith into hers, buttoning it carefully while she tried to process what was happening. As we walked toward the door, I heard my mother's voice, small and broken. "Alexandra, please. She's my granddaughter." I turned back one last time. "Then you should have treated her like one." The drive home was quiet except for Meredith's soft sniffles. After about 20 minutes, I pulled into a McDonald's, the golden arches glowing against the dark November sky. "How about we have our own Thanksgiving? Just you and me?" She managed a small smile. "Can we get apple pies?" "We can get whatever we want. We make the rules now." As we sat in that McDonald's, eating nuggets and apple pies, watching other holiday stragglers come and go, I started planning. They wanted to exclude my daughter. They wanted to make her feel worthless? Fine. But I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd lost. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a detective of my own family history. I called cousin Janet first, the one who'd stopped coming to gatherings 3 years ago. "Your father did the same thing to my kids," she told me. "Said 8-year-olds shouldn't be at the adult table. When I protested, he told me I was raising them without proper boundaries." Then I reached out to Aunt Patricia, Roland's own sister who lived in Oregon. "I haven't spoken to Roland in 5 years," she admitted. "He told me my divorce was an embarrassment to the family name, said I should have stayed quiet and endured, like proper Hammond women do." Uncle Stuart, the black sheep who worked as a high school teacher instead of going into finance, shared his own story. Roland announced at Thanksgiving dinner 10 years ago that teachers were just glorified babysitters. Said it right in front of my kids. That was our last family gathering. Each conversation revealed another crack in the Hammond family foundation. Roland hadn't just alienated us, he'd systematically pushed away anyone who didn't meet his standards. The perfect family he projected was nothing but a skeleton crew of those still willing to endure his abuse. On December 20th, I sent a group email to every Hammond family member I could find, including Roland and Vivian. The subject line read, "Hammond Family Christmas, New Traditions." "Dear family," I wrote, "Meredith and I are hosting Christmas Eve at our home. We have room for everyone, and I mean everyone, adults and children. No one will eat in the kitchen unless they're helping me cook. We'll have games for all ages, a hot chocolate bar that Meredith is personally designing, and a white elephant gift exchange with a $20 limit because family isn't about how much you spend. Dinner starts at 4 p.m. Kids eat first because they're the most important guests. Every child will sit at the main table. Every voice will be heard. RSVP by December 22nd. Within hours, my phone started buzzing. Janet called in tears. "We'll be there, all of us." Patricia booked flights from Oregon that same day. Stuart and his family confirmed immediately. Uncle Leonard called, his voice uncertain. "Roland won't like this." "That's his choice, Uncle Leonard. You're welcome with or without his approval." By December 22nd, I had 23 confirmations. Everyone except Roland, Vivian, Dennis, and Pauline. Dennis called me that evening. "What are you trying to prove? You're destroying this family." "I'm not destroying anything, Dennis. I'm rebuilding it. You're welcome to be part of that, but only if you can treat my daughter with respect." Dad's furious. He says you're being vindictive. I'm being a mother. There's a difference. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow, like something from a movie. My small row house was transformed. Meredith had spent days making paper snowflakes and stringing lights. We'd pushed all the furniture against the walls to make room for folding tables, borrowed from neighbors. The smell of cookies and hot chocolate filled every corner. They started arriving at 3:30. Janet's kids immediately attached themselves to Meredith, looking at her like she was a hero. "Mom told us what you did," her oldest said. "How you stood up to Grandpa Roland. That was so brave." Uncle Stuart brought his guitar and led the kids in carols. Patricia had everyone in tears laughing about Roland's old attempts to control her dating life. Theodore showed up at 5 without his parents, looking uncertain. "Is it okay if I'm here?" he asked quietly. "Everyone's welcome here," I told him. "That's the point." At 7 p.m., my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was barely a whisper. "There are only 4 of us here. Leonard and Francine went to your house. Theodore, too. The table looks so empty." "You're welcome to come, Mom. All of you are. Your father won't allow it." "Then that's his choice. But Meredith and I made ours." Through the phone, I could hear Roland in the background, ranting about respect and tradition. But in my living room, I heard something else. Laughter. Real, genuine laughter. Children playing. Adults talking without fear of judgment. Family being family. The party went until midnight. As I tucked Meredith into bed, she was still glowing from the evening. "Mom, this was the best Christmas Eve ever. Everyone talked to me like I mattered, like I was actually interesting." "Because you do matter, sweetheart, and you are interesting. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." She hugged me tighter than she had in months. Uncle Stuart said I could visit his school and talk to his science class about my project, and Aunt Patricia wants me to come to Oregon this summer. She said she has horses. "That sounds wonderful, baby." "Mom, Why did Grandpa Roland treat me that way? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. Some people think love has to be earned through achievements or status. They don't understand that real love is given freely, especially to children. That's not about you. That's about something broken inside them. The next morning, Christmas Day, I found a text from Dennis. Dad spent Christmas dinner ranting about respect and tradition to an almost empty table. Mom cried through most of it. Hope you're satisfied. I wrote back, I am. Meredith is too. That's what matters. That was 5 years ago. Meredith is 17 now, confident and strong, heading to college next year with a full scholarship to study biochemistry. She still remembers that Thanksgiving, but not with pain, with gratitude. You taught me something important that day, she told me recently while we were filling out her college applications, that I should never accept less than I deserve, and that someone who really loves me will always choose me. You chose me when it cost you your entire family. I didn't lose my family, I told her. I found out who my real family was. The family dynamics shifted completely after that Christmas. Roland and Vivian now host quiet dinners with just Dennis and Pauline, who had a son 2 years ago. I heard from Aunt Francine, who still talks to everyone, that they're already planning which private schools he'll attend, which university will accept their legacy donation. The cycle continues, but with far fewer participants. Meanwhile, our alternative gatherings grew bigger each year. Last Thanksgiving, we had 32 people crammed into my house. 3 tables stretched from the dining room into the living room. Kids and adults all mixed together. No hierarchy, no exclusion. Meredith helped the younger cousins with their homework while the adults cooked. Theodore, who's become a regular at our gatherings, brought his girlfriend and warned her, "This is what real family looks like. It's loud and chaotic and nobody matches, but everyone belongs." Last month, Dennis showed up at our Halloween party alone. Pauline was at Roland's helping plan some charity gala. He stood at my door in a ridiculous vampire costume, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for not speaking up that day, for all the days I didn't speak up, for choosing Dad's approval over doing what was right." Before I could respond, Meredith appeared beside me in her NASA astronaut costume. "It's okay, Uncle Dennis. Mom taught me that family isn't about blood or tradition. It's about who shows up for you. You're showing up now. That's what counts." He started crying right there on my porch, this successful lawyer in a vampire cape, finally understanding what he'd missed all those years. My mother calls occasionally, always when Roland's not home. She sends Meredith birthday cards with cash tucked inside and long notes about how proud she is. Last week, she called to say she'd framed Meredith's acceptance letter to the science program. "I want to visit," she whispered. "I want to know my granddaughter before it's too late." "You're always welcome here, Mom, but not in secret. Not if you're going to go back and pretend we don't exist. Meredith deserves better than a grandmother who's ashamed of her." The line went quiet for a long moment. "I know," she finally said. "I'm working on it." Sometimes people ask if I regret walking out that Thanksgiving, if I think I overreacted to a seating arrangement. I tell them it was never about where my daughter sat. It was about what that seat represented, her worth, her place, her value in their eyes. It was about showing her that she should never shrink herself to fit at someone else's table. That McDonald's Thanksgiving became our tradition. Every year, after our big family gathering with the relatives who chose us, Meredith and I sneak away for nuggets and apple pies. It's our reminder that the best families aren't always the ones you're born into. They're the ones you build. They're the ones who see you, value you, and pull up a chair without being asked. The table you're offered isn't always the one you have to accept. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give your child is showing them they deserve a seat at a better table, even if you have to build it yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between toxic tradition and protecting someone you love, please share this video. Leave a comment about your own experience with family dynamics. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about standing up, speaking out, and choosing love over legacy.